These guys may want some. And one more. When do we start? Are we on? Okay. You ready? All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us for this vitally important conversation on growing Ukraine's economic sectors. I'm honored to be the moderator. I've got the easy job here, the moderator for this panel of experts, each of whom possesses a deep understanding of the complexities of working and doing business in Ukraine. But we can't begin the conversation this afternoon without acknowledging the human cost of Russia's illegal and brutal full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the nearly 14 months of death and destruction that have followed. Missile and drone attacks, aerial bombings, artillery and ground assaults have hit cities and infrastructure, killing and injuring civilians, damaging roads, medical facilities, power systems, critical infrastructure, schools, and homes. Millions of Ukrainians, as we speak, remain without reliable sources of food, of water, of power and heat. And in addition, the destruction of the environment by Russia's forces has caused air, ground, and water pollution and has threatened the food security of Ukraine and of the world. The challenge of post-conflict cleanup of the environment will be significant, but it will only be a small piece of the total cost of reconstruction of Ukraine, a cost that the World Bank has most recently estimated at over $411 billion, and unfortunately that number is growing. But despite the many tragedies that we've seen since February of last year, there's also hope. There's hope because Ukrainians have refused to give up, and they continue to fight, to build, and to persevere. There's hope, too, because the world has come together to support the people of Ukraine at a time of need. There's hope because of Ukraine's commitment to building a new economy from a devastating war, an economy integrated with Europe, with strong transatlantic ties, and an economy that will be competitive in the 21st century global economy, an economy of opportunity, an economy that's sustainable, stable, modernized, and that takes advantage of the vitality of the private sector through public-private partnerships, entrepreneurship, innovation, and thoughtful investment. War has also shed a light on Ukraine's many strengths. It's a nation with a national purpose and determination that's been forged in battle, with an educated population that lives on a fertile soil that was once and will be, yet again, the breadbasket of the world, and with friends who stand in awe, as they see a nation that's willing to endure horrors as it fights for our common values. So we must look towards a future where Ukraine will be prosperous, dynamic and strong, capable of defending itself, and successful in providing opportunity to its people. As we think of the key sectors for a future Ukrainian economy in energy, in agriculture, in digital and biotechnology, including life sciences, we also have to emphasize the importance of an inclusive economy that's ready to fully leverage the population's brainpower, its talent and innovation, and to offer pathways to educate, train, and rebuild the workforce. An economy that empowers women to participate in all sectors. We welcome the Ukrainian government's commitment to creating an environment that will encourage private sector investment and innovation and tackling corruption. Given Russia's attacks on cities and infrastructure, the scale of the redevelopment effort in Ukraine will be immense, and it'll be important, it'll be necessary for Ukraine to unleash the full potential of its workforce, creating a business-enabling environment conducive to private sector-led economic growth. And that's why we were so encouraged to hear that President Zelensky already has welcomed back investment in Ukraine, saying, and it's true, that the time to invest is now. The need for the bold and original ideas of the private sector will be more important in Ukraine than ever before. And we're here today. We're here today, this afternoon, to talk exactly about this topic and to highlight a couple of economic sectors in Ukraine that are poised for growth through private sector investment and partnership. Ukraine will win the war, and it must also win the peace. So please join me in welcoming our panel, who are here to provide their insights on growing Ukraine's key sectors. Our first panelist is Lena Kozarny, the founding partner and chief executive officer at Horizon Capital. Welcome. Gary McGuigan is president for global trade and the chief risk officer at ADM, Archer Daniels Midland. Chris Padilla is vice president for government and regulatory affairs at IBM. And Mike Parrish is vice president of public affairs for science and sustainability at Bayer. So we have a nice setup. We have two speakers on tech, Lena and Chris, and then two sides of the agriculture space. On the seed side, Mike Parrish, and on the trading and delivery side, Gary McGuigan. So thank you all for coming. Let me start with a very general question that will hopefully get us started. And let's start with you, Lena. What advantages does Ukraine offer in the digital, agriculture, and life science sectors? Just give us a little bit of a sense for what the opportunities are.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary of State. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to everyone for organizing such a wonderful event. I've been in Ukraine for 30 years. I'm chair of the board of directors of AmCham and also lead Horizon Capital, which is the leading private equity firm in Ukraine. Over the years, we've attracted $2.3 billion to the country, and over the last 10 years, we've become the country's largest tech investor. And tech really right now is driving resilience in Ukraine. If we look at tech as an industry, when we started investing back in 2003, it was 110 million. It's a 7.3 billion industry, and the plans are to increase it to 17 billion. This is an industry that over the last year, despite all that we've seen in Ukraine, the horror, 5,000 ballistic missiles, as you said, 3,500 drone strikes, 1,000 drone strikes, 3,500. So despite all the horror that we've seen over the last year, we see a tech sector that is resilient, that has grown over 6%, that employs a great deal of young, new generation professionals across the country. We've seen it become 45% of service exports in 2022, up from 38% the year before. We've also seen that this tech sector is exactly what Undersecretary of State you're saying in terms of gender equality and inclusivity. Over the last decade, the number of women in the sector has increased 10 times. So the tech sector in Ukraine, despite the challenges, the tech sector is flourishing. I'll give you an example of a company that we back that has become, just like Ring is #1 in the US, Ajax is #1 in Europe. And this is a company that we've backed since it was a small business. They have over 4 years grown 67%. In the last year, they grew 41%. They were producing 100% in Kiev. In 35 days, they moved 160 20-ton truckloads to the EU border. They were 4 times their production capacity already in April. This is the kind of resilience. Not only that, but in their spare time, they developed the air raid siren app that everybody uses, Trevoha, to tell them when the air raid sirens are happening and to let people know it's time to go to the bomb shelter. So it's not only that the sector is resilient, that it will be part of Ukraine's future, but on the side, the level that they are helping Ukraine at this moment is tremendous.
Thank you. Gary.
Thanks, Undersecretary. ADM have been in Ukraine since 1993 now, so we're very well versed in the resilience and the attraction of the country. And I think some of the advantages are you've alluded to them in your introduction. First of all, I think it's the people. We have 650 colleagues in Ukraine who have been working pretty much non-stop since the war started. It's been very much business as usual, even in constant air raid sirens and going to places of shelter. So it's been amazing just how resilient they've been. I think the soil and the fertile soil is in Ukraine is also a huge advantage. The assets they have within the ag sector, especially the port of Odessa, I think is critical to the food security within the region of North Africa and the Middle East. And I think its role that it'll play in the regenerative ag and sustainability field going forward, it cannot be underestimated. So I can't speak highly enough about the attraction of the ag sector and the advantages it has for global food security.
Chris.
Thank you very much, Jose. Thank you for moderating our panel. I would echo everything Lena said. The tech business is a talent business, and Ukraine has amazing talent. You can see it in the innovation and the entrepreneurship in what is one of probably the best e-government citizen services apps of any government on earth that the Ukrainian government has created and provides an incredible range of citizen services through people's smartphones. We saw evidence of this when shortly after the start of the war, we worked with a number of our clients, including the National Tax Administration, the Customs Authority, the various banks, to quickly and efficiently move data out of data centers in basements in Kyiv into the cloud so that the data could be protected. At that time, we didn't know what was going to happen with the invasion and whether Kyiv would fall. And everything was done seamlessly. And there was lots of talk, you may remember, about cybersecurity threats and the Russians were going to take everything down. That largely has not happened. But it's not because the Russians haven't tried. It's because of the amazing talent that you have among Ukraine's tech sector in protecting themselves and being resilient. And so what we're optimistic about is that source of talent. We've started some programs to do skills training in things like cybersecurity for Ukrainian refugees who are now living in Poland. And most of those refugees are women and children. And we see an opportunity when we hope in the not too distant future for many of those refugees to return, that there's no reason Ukraine could not become a center of IT services in Europe. IBM today employs many thousands of people in Poland and Slovakia and Bulgaria because you have great technical talent at a competitive cost. Ukraine could very easily match or exceed that, and I think I was happy to hear the Prime Minister this morning describe it as a priority sector, along with agriculture and raw materials and other things for early recovery and growth.
Yeah, Mr. Undersecretary, first, thanks for moderating this. Bayer's been operating in Ukraine since 1992, both in healthcare and in agriculture. And I would say what brought us there then is what keeps us there today, which is the tremendous people and the tremendous opportunity. And so we've invested in agriculture over the years in Ukraine, and we continue to because we see that opportunity continuing. You said it very well in your opening remarks. The Ukraine is the breadbasket of the world. It's one of the reasons that we're there, but not just that. The impact that agriculture in Ukraine has outside of Ukraine is equally as important as what it does domestically.
So let's talk a little bit about the future and the constraints. As you've pointed out, agriculture has always been a mainstay of the Ukrainian economy. 10% of GDP prior to the war, 41% of total exports. But since then, you've got a labor force that's out fighting. You've got fields that have been mined. You've got a fertilizer shortage, and you've got huge environmental damage. So I'd like to hear about the constraints on the agricultural side, but also On the tech side, as you pointed out, before the war, Ukraine's IT workforce was highly ranked. I mean, I've seen studies out there that rank them 4th in the world. And actually, Lena, you may have seen this. IT workers in the last 5 years before the war actually doubled. So you've got an immense increase there. But there again, you've got an infrastructure that's been pummeled. Talk about the constraints. Talk about the next couple of years. What are the constraints and what needs to be done in order to overcome those constraints? And also, I think there's a synergy here that I think, Gary, you alluded to in earlier in a conversation with me. You've got a potential synergy here between agriculture and tech that I'd like to hear about. So let me just talk about constraints, and then we'll talk about opportunities.
I think
anybody, go for it.
I think the biggest constraint at the moment for the ag sector is its ability to export. I think that the importance of the grain corridor to export through the port of Odessa and out through the Black Sea cannot be underestimated. The Ukraine's export, it produces between 90 and 100 million tons of ag commodities, exports about 70% of that. Before the war, over 90% of that was going out through the Black Sea. So without that grain corridor and the certainty of that, that's the biggest constraint I see in the short and medium term to the ag sector. And that's why it's so important that issue gets dealt with and isn't weaponized or disrupted by Russia. It needs to be free, again, for food security within the region. But to me, that's the biggest constraint for the ag sector. And dealing with that is the priority that all of us should be really focusing on.
Mm-hmm. Maybe picking up on that, on constraints, farmers are used to dealing with a lot of variables and putting a crop in the ground and getting it to harvest at the end of the year. We've added, obviously, a tremendous complexity to that with the ongoing war. As we look at it, one of the biggest challenges that we have, we continue to invest in the country, some $60 million that you heard Ambassador Power announce in her speech earlier today. But it's not just us that needs to invest, it's the partners that we work with. It's the small and medium-sized enterprises that don't have the access to capital, that do have liquidity challenges. And it's how we support them so that they can acquire products from a company like Bayer, the needed seeds that they have to grow a crop, but they also need fertilizer. Mm-hmm. They need crop protection. They need all of the things so that they can put a crop in the ground and then get it to Gary at the end of the year, and so it can be exported. The other piece that's added to this, to the complexity as well is, and we heard the finance minister talk about this morning, which is demining. Most farmers don't wake up and say, I'd like to go plant that field, but are there munitions in it? Bayer's partnered with a Swiss NGO and with the Department of State. We've acquired a demining machine that's been delivered into the country. People are being trained on how to use it now, and our hope is that it will be out clearing fields very shortly. But that's a complexity that didn't exist before. That's a tremendous challenge to farm in a war setting. And so that's a huge constraint. The statistics that you gave, I just want to reinforce the importance of agriculture to the country. It's 11% of GDP. 20% of the workforce, 40% of the total value of exports is agriculture. And so that's why it's not just important to support the industry as it exists today and keep it viable. It's important to invest now for the rebuilding so that industry can continue to grow when this is all done.
And the demining piece, I saw a number in the most recent World Bank study that it's several hundred millions of dollars in terms of demining, so good work.
What we're doing is but a small drop in what needs to be done, yes.
What about on the digital side, Chris and Lena? What are some of the constraints there? Infrastructure is one, but I've got to believe too that displaced people is also another one. So give us some constraints, please.
Yeah, definitely displaced people. I mean, in terms of the tech industry, though it is displaying so much resilience, just like ag or other industries, access to capital is critical. And what we saw during 2022 was that Ukrainian startups and venture capital and also later stage technology companies were able to raise $350 million, despite the fact that there's a full-fledged invasion that occurred in February. At the same time, we all know what's happening in the tech markets globally and how hard it is now to access capital. Now, for folks that are not in Ukraine, you have debt, you have other options, but in Ukraine, I mean, imagine local currency loans are 25%. For those entrepreneurs and throughout the entire ecosystem, we've seen, I'm on the board of Ukrainian Startup Fund. Of course, those government funds are now directed to fighting a war, to that kind of, access to capital that you need across the entire ecosystem, early stage, venture, later stage. That has to continue. That's why we're really super excited about raising this $250 million fund, which is going to back expert champions, including tech. We're halfway there. We soon should hit our target. And it's absolutely important. What we heard throughout this entire day was give Ukrainians the resources to help themselves. And that includes access to capital for tech entrepreneurs.
I think in our business, the constraints there are a couple. First, I mentioned that tech is a talent business. If you've got your talent, serving in the military or volunteering, they cannot be sitting in a client center or doing software development. So that's one obvious constraint. The other one is, while there has not been a massive cybersecurity attack successfully made yet, I do think that what IBM does is we manage the global data of global clients. So the world's biggest banks and retailers and healthcare systems entrust their data to us. Are they prepared to see their data managed from a country that is under active attack, both physically and from a cybersecurity standpoint? I think there's a lot of reason to believe that the data is quite secure there, but capital and clients can sometimes be very reticent about investing in that kind of an area. So what we've done is said, okay, for now, until the security situation gets better, let's focus on talent development. Let's train as many women as we can who may be with their families in Poland or Romania. Let's continue to focus on cyber resiliency and data center management in Ukraine. And at some time in the hopefully very near future, we think global clients will see Ukraine as a great place to have their data run from, just as they do today, whether it's Poland or Slovakia or another Eastern European country.
Is there, both in agriculture and in tech, is there a small and medium enterprise angle here? I've got to believe that small farmers can't get credit. Last time I looked, the majority of businesses in Ukraine were small and medium enterprises, actually micro and small. What role does private capital? I'm assuming that maybe there's some credit that you provide your farmers. Is some credit? I mean, Lena, that's your living, right? Providing capital to small startups, and I'm sure IBM has the same. What is the small and medium enterprise angle here? And then my next question, which I might as well ask, is is there a role here for the U.S. government and other governments to support this? So, any of you? We have no.
I think from the ag piece,
Yeah.
the small, medium, and micro, I think, is represented right across the board. And again, they play a vital role. It's not Brazil where you have these huge conglomerates that are controlling ag. It's much, much less developed than that. And ADM are buying from the farmer every single day and have been doing since the war started and since 1993, obviously. So I think we are supporting it, and I think the U.S. government needs to keep lobbying and making sure that the world sees the importance of Ukraine ag, not just to Ukraine, but to the wider world in terms of food security. That's why I keep coming back, and I'll ad nauseum keep reminding people we got to keep the grain corridor opening, because that's the lifeblood to support agriculture going forward in the short and medium term.
Is there an alternative, Gary, to the corridor?
I mean, the solidarity lanes that have gone across the land border and then down the Danube is working, but not to the same extent. You might get 2 to 3 million tons a month at best going that route, but the country needs to be exporting 5 or 6 million tons per month, and that's why pre-war, 95% of exports were going out through the Black Sea, and also going across the land border or down the Danube into Romania as a financial penalty for the farmer, because the cost of transporting it to the border and multiple handling as you go across the border. Remember, you got an old Russian rail gauge in Ukraine that can't go straight into Europe. You need to stop, unload, reload on the other side of the border. So it's very cumbersome and very expensive, which again has to be paid for. So I think the key to this is making sure that the grain corridor in Odessa is the main route for export.
Like SMEs?
What I was going to say is to come back to your question on what can government do. I think when you focus on what private business can do in partnership with government, it's that we build back the agriculture sector in Ukraine better than it exists today. And there are a lot of opportunities to do that, whether it be infrastructure so that grain can flow in different ways, but it's also in infrastructure so that they can adopt digital technologies in agriculture, so that the agriculture industry is ready for the next crisis or the next challenge that comes. And I think digital agriculture as a platform can do that, so that they can use artificial intelligence, so that they can use advanced imaging, that they can use all of the tools that are being developed to make their operations more efficient, more sustainable. So whatever that next crisis comes, they're more prepared to deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a synergy here. I'll turn now to the tech group. I've seen it on the energy side that that there ought to be a rebuilding and based on renewables, no longer depending on invader. And technology can also be part of that, building back better synergy. Talk a little bit about, but do talk a little bit about SMEs as well and what you're doing there.
Yeah, this building back better concept extends to SMEs as well. Everybody knows that historically, SMEs were low teens, 12%, 14% of the economy. And this provides a historic opportunity for SMEs to really be a lifeblood for the economy, to really grow. As we see in many economies, it can be 70, 80% of the economy. For SMEs, I want to step back because I'm super proud that the origins of our firm, Horizon Capital, come out of the enterprise fund system, which was launched by Congress, USAID funded. We're one of 10 enterprise funds that were formed after the fall of the Soviet Union and really focused on developing SMEs in the private sector in Ukraine. The first grant was $150 million, but not everybody knows that this year, another $135 million was provided to Western and Enterprise Fund in order to fuel SMEs, and that's everything from high impact, low interest loans, to ensuring that those amounts, both microcredits, high impact, low interest loans, but that they're reaching beyond the IT sector. Tech is very important, but also the businesses that are being set up now in the creative cluster throughout the country. This is a government priority, not only in Ukraine, but for allied governments as well. You will have close to 800,000 veterans returning. There is a huge push and interest in assisting them and their families to start their businesses. Tech enables that as well. We see that with one of our investments is the largest e-commerce platform in the country. That e-commerce platform through Marketplace allows 100,000 small businesses to also sell their goods and services through that platform. So you see throughout that really this is the moment for Ukraine to shift into SMEs and to promote that sector of the economy, which also will reduce the oligarchs in Ukraine as well. So it's a win-win-win across the board to promote SMEs.
Please.
I'll talk a little bit about what the government can do. We had Ambassador Power, the USAID administrator, spoke earlier today, and one of the key messages we've been giving to AID is, in the tech sector, one advantage is you don't need a huge amount of, you're not building a factory to provide IT services. You need a building, reliable power, good telecom connections, and talent. And so what we've urged, and AID is doing this, is to focus on some of those areas, like the telecom infrastructure, and also on, they actually have an RFP out right now at AID for cyber resilience and data center resilience to protect the security of data in Ukraine. Those are the kinds of relatively small but smart investments that I think can, supercharge the growth of this sector when the security conditions get better. The sector's already growing, particularly the entrepreneurial segment, but I think you could potentially see big investments by or big employment by multinationals in the tech sector, like my company or Microsoft or some of the others, once the security situation allows people to feel comfortable about having their data managed from this, very talented country.
You're all in the private sector, but as you know, the state sector was quite dominant in Ukraine before the war. What are you seeing now in terms of that relationship? And is there a public-private partnership that could be, or two that could really be had here? Tell us a little bit about the role, the potential for public-private partnerships in growing the Ukrainian economy. Chris, you're shaking your head, so I'm starting with you.
Yeah, I think it's vital. Prior to the war, all of our clients, well, not all, but most of our clients were Ukrainian government entities or state-owned enterprises. Great clients, they continue to be clients, but what we hope to see is more vibrancy in the private sector system with the Building Back Better. For example, we hope to see more opportunities to sell to privately owned banks, including major European banks that may come back. Some of them never left, like Raiffeisen and a few others, but even we hope maybe some big American banks investing. Those are the kinds of things that I think will again help to supercharge the economy. The possibilities are really unlimited when you consider the depth of the talent that's there. It's just a question of how do you unleash the talent by providing the right kind of infrastructure support, the right kind of cybersecurity, and then the right kind of private sector clients.
Gary.
I think certainly the engagement we have had with both the Ukrainian government, with the US government, with WTO, etc., since the war began has been really one of collaboration, to making sure that we work together collaboratively because of the importance of Ukraine to global food security. And I think that'll continue once the war is over and the rebuilding begins, because I do think that one thing that's happened, first I think with the COVID pandemic and now again with the war, is people took food for granted, took the supply chains for granted. There was much more of a just-in-time delivery system. I think what's the last 3 years have taught us all is that doesn't really work anymore, and we really need to have more of a just-in-case delivery system. I think working with governments, wherever that is vitally important.
Yeah.
Public-private partnerships are essential, and when we think about public-private partnerships, we think of the concessions, the port concessions that were granted right before the war, the full-fledged invasion. At the same time, I want to urge everyone to think of it in a broader way. So you have the private sector on the ground who needs access to resources, access to capital, and what we're seeing is that those private sector players who are already there, that they're partnering with public institutions. This can be with development finance institutions. We heard from Scott Nathan today about DFC coming into Ukraine, announcing up to $1 billion, putting monies to work alongside reputable private sector players to really move projects forward now, not when the war is over. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to see that beginning where you've got the private sector players being able to attract monies from the development finance institutions, from Ukraine's bilateral partners, putting that to work in projects, and that expanding. It is happening in the tech sector, for example, with our fund that is backed by a number of DFIs. And then you see next step, it will be going into the, as you said about the assets, going into light manufacturing, food processing, higher up the value chain, those kinds of projects. Then once the war, real hostilities are over, you're going to see that boom in terms of infrastructure. And that's very exciting. The PPP model is essential there. Ukraine has always been too small for the large players to come in. Everything has been subscale. It's a horrible thing, but you don't have a scale issue. You have post all of this, and Ukraine will be victorious, but you have opportunities for infrastructure and funds for those who are doing this throughout the world on a large scale to really come in, the Bechtels of the world, et cetera, to really make a significant impact in Ukraine.
Thanks, Mike.
Lena said it very well, so I'll be short. They're essential for the private sector to bring the investment and the innovation, to partner with government to help manage risk and bring scale. I would point to Bayer as a founding member of the Agri-Ukraine partnership with USAID as a great model for how we can move quickly, how we can marshal resources. And again, in a time of war, we're investing $60 million to expand and upgrade a plant, to be ready for when this turns, to support the economy and the agricultural sector.
All right, we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you the last question. I've left it for last. What can the U.S. government do to support Ukrainian efforts to have a business environment that will facilitate growth and investment in Ukraine? Anybody?
I think the U.S. government have obviously done a fantastic job so far in leading, supporting the Ukrainian people, government, through this horrible situation that they're in. I think that's going to be needed long after the war is won by Ukraine. So I think just the commitment to keep doing that, given the importance for food security, I think it's just keep the commitment that's there going forward, and don't forget the Ukrainian people.
Clearly, we have to win the war. We have to be victorious to achieve peace and the long-term stability that we want to see, and that rebuild, that renewal, that revitalization that we want to see. So clearly, the military aid, the financial aid to keep the state infrastructure running, but also we're very excited about the private sector focus. The private sector hasn't been first and foremost. Folks tend to think that all of Ukraine is burning under fire, and we see that resilience. We see the banking sector running. We see the mobile telecom operators running. We see every single challenge today. To hear that Ukraine is exporting energy again, electricity, that's just incredible given the tax that Ukraine has faced since October 10th. So we're very excited about this, also adding the private sector to the table. It's very important. It's very important. They need the access to the resources. What I heard today from DFC, very exciting, very exciting. DFC put $60 billion to work last year. They've announced up to $1 billion. That's a challenge to all of us. Let's be sitting here next year and be talking about not $1 billion from DFC, but let's be talking about $10 billion. So lots to do, and I'm confident that all of us together can do it.
Well, I would agree. The first thing is to win the war and to provide the tools that the Ukrainians need to win the war. The second thing I would say is to have the U.S. government strategy has been great at providing Ukraine with the assistance it needs to survive. It's now time, I think, to shift the strategic focus to what is the U.S. government strategy for reconstruction and development. And that could mean, how much money do we put into DFC as opposed to how much money we're, providing for, temporary emergency relief and things like that. That was what the government did when many of the Eastern European countries emerged after the end of the Cold War. There was a consistent strategy for how do we help these countries to develop. Lena mentioned her fund came out of some of that, right? We need that, those lessons from 30 years ago to run the same playbook.
Thank you. Were you going to say anything?
And maybe lastly, just to continue to provide the leadership that you are. I mean, yourself, Ambassador Power, Secretary Raimondo, all of the speakers that we heard from today from the U.S. government, to continue to lead, to continue to knock down the barriers so that we can win the peace after.
Thank you. We've run out of time. I wish we had more time. I tell folks that we wake up thinking about how to help Ukraine. We go to sleep thinking about how to work Ukraine, and in between we try to help Ukraine, and we pray for Ukraine. Look, as I said at the beginning, Ukraine will win the war, but it must also win the peace. Experience has shown that countries should not wait until the end of a war to begin planning for the end, and only by doing so can they honor the sacrifice of those who've given their lives for a better future. Thank you, and let me thank all of you panelists for your insights, and I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.